Start recording, hit me.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Gestalten podcast. My name is Eric Galina, and I'm joined by my colleague.
Martin Goschwald. Hello, Eric. How are
Hello.
things?
Yeah, busy, man. Busy. It's good to be busy. It keeps you on your toes, keeps you fresh. So it's been a little while since we've recorded a podcast, so I think it's good that we start by discussing some of the things that have been revealed and unveiled. But also, I think maybe we should backtrack just a little bit because while we were in Shanghai, obviously the New York Auto Show was going on at the same time, and there was quite a lot of product from the Hyundai Group that was unveiled there. And one in particular that I think we should discuss before delving into some more recent product. And the car in particular that I'm talking about is a concept, and it's called the Kia Habanero. And that is, I think, really a sweet little vehicle that is, according to the press release. Unfortunately, I didn't see this thing in person. I'm just judging it by pictures here, but they do say, habanero, of course, play on words, the pepper, spicy pepper, and it's a bit of a spicy design, designed in California and quite unique and original in what is now the default crossover vehicle typology. So what are your thoughts on that?
I'm a big fan of these, smaller size cars nowadays because, as regular listeners of the podcast know, I'm a bit sick and tired of these SUVs. And from the pictures, what I really do enjoy about it is it's the kind of simplicity. Yeah, I mean, you can clearly see that Kia is trying to find the next step, and in terms of where are they going to go next, and what is their next kind of corporate language going to be? We've seen that with the show car that they've shown in Geneva, for example, which had a new font on the Kia logo, for example. This one now has the old one, but obviously it has much more, modern elements that come into play. Also, it seems that this seems like a future-proof platform. So I'm not 100% sure if we will see that kind of car in detail, but because they call it the Habanero, and obviously Nero is one of the cars that they already make, this could very much be a preview of a future Nero, and for that, I do like it very, very much. Of course, we do see some clues of cars that have received a lot of praise over the years. And that particular one, the one that comes to mind, especially with the lights in the back, would be the Volvo XC40, where you can definitely see some kind of similarities, but also some of the Infinity stuff that we've recently seen in terms of surfacing, at least what we can see from the pictures. But in general, definitely something from the Kia side, especially, the colors once again look very, very nice. I just saw actually that, I take that back from earlier. They are using this new logo on the steering wheel. So, it seems very, very much that Kia is actually moving forward into kind of the next level. And it is a level that I do really like. Yeah, I like it simple, and I'm very, very much looking forward to see how this actually translates into production cars. Because over the past few years, I would say the show cars weren't that great, but then you had fantastic production cars such as the Stinger, for example, which was absolutely great. And now I want to see how close they can come to these ideas: simple surfacing, nice color themes, really playing with the color and trim. So kudos to the team over there. And just seeing how this will develop into the actual language that we then see on the road.
I agree. I mean, it's a conceptual kind of toe dip into what a vehicle in this type of it's funny because it's not really categorized as being anything. It's very much a crossover car designed to appeal to a broad range of people from looking for certain things in a vehicle. But because it was designed in California, where people live out of their cars, this is something that I think from a typology perspective is really a good all-arounder. Now, from a design sensibility, I love the graphic treatments on the side. The colorways, yes, very expressive, very bold, befitting this concept car name. But I really like, the side profile and like you mentioned as well, the simplicity of the IP. Like everything is really quite very simple and clean. And then you've got this profile that is very, very expressive with this very graphic treatment. And I think that Kia is moving into a very much more graphical treatment than it did before. Certainly in this concept is kind of, a bit over the top perhaps, but it's really well done and well resolved. So I really enjoyed that. And I wanted to mention that because we didn't talk too much about New York cars. Especially in light of the other cars that were unveiled in New York. So the Lincoln, what was it? The Lincoln Corsair SUV, which is basically a middle ground between the Aviator and the Navigator. It's kind of another SUV basically. It does push forward Lincoln's design themes, but I'm not that big of a fan. Again, this is a production car, so it's not like allowing us to dream too much. And so I don't know. I mean, I guess it's way better than what it replaces, but at the same time, it's not as good as what we saw from the Hyundai group. Again, Hyundai showed another concept in New York that was really or another production car, I should say, in New York that was quite nice as well. It was a little SUV thing, the Hyundai Venue, which is again expressive. It kind of reminds me a little bit of what Mini did, what Fiat did with the personalization aspects and different colored roof tones and things like that, because that's really where people are going now in terms of the auto industry in general is moving very much into user experience and personalization, hugely into personalization. And another car that was unveiled in production form would have been the CT5. So Cadillac moving forward with a lot of the themes that were first displayed on the Escala concept. And that was some years ago, first shown at Pebble Beach. So I quite like the way that Cadillac is moving forward.
Just what I wanted to add, to the Kia quickly. There's two things that I don't like, and one has a little bit something to do. We've talked about this before. Was the front. I think the front is a little bit too busy. I've mentioned to you that the front, especially the lighting graphic, reminds me a bit of the Neo ET7 and the Neo ES8 and ES6 kind of front. This kind of graphic looks somehow familiar. So I'm not 100% sure if I do like that one. I do like the color scheme behind it. That's actually pretty cool, but it seems a bit more like, what can we do there? It looks a little bit more like a rear than an actual front. And also maybe that's something that's a little bit geeky, but if some of our avid listeners might remember that we did a special episode with Quirin Friedel, the visualization artist from Byton. When we look at those pictures, Eric, and obviously we judge this on pictures at the moment because we weren't in New York, the pictures are not great. They look like toy cars. There's a lot of things that I don't understand with the lighting. It really looks like the model, wasn't properly done, or if the visualization, especially the driving visualization wasn't really that great. So I think it takes away a little bit of the car. And it takes away a little bit of the quality of the car, but that is just an observation that came to mind when I saw that. And obviously, in terms of the judging from our perspective, we want to make sure that we mention this as well, because this is one of the examples where I do think the picture quality, and not in terms of resolution, actually in terms of the work that's being done, was not that great. And you can unfortunately see that a little bit in the car, maybe especially in the front, but. That's just my 2 cents on the Kia.
All right. Point noted. Now, I think the star of the show clearly was another product from the Hyundai group, and that was the Genesis Mint concept. Without a doubt, that was the highlight. And Hyundai has been or Hyundai as a group, and Genesis for the last several years has really been dominating in New York, mainly because they don't have they've got the spotlight all to themselves. They did show the new Sonata in Shanghai. I think it was also present in New York, but that is a step away from what the Hyundai brand from a Hyundai brand design language currently. So that's kind of another can of worms. But the Genesis Mint concept was really, really quite cool, very interesting, very novel, and a brilliant take on a compact luxury car. Because Genesis, of course, is aiming to be a very premium brand, and but also you can't deny the fact that there are a lot of city dwellers, a lot of people living in urban environments, and that's essentially what this car was intended,
Mm.
who this car was intended for.
Yeah, and I think it was also a surprise to many people that Genesis came up with, a small vehicle, because we've only known them so far with sedans, with big SUVs. Obviously, last year they showed the Essentia concept, which was a sports car. So it was quite a surprise that they actually show up with something like this. So kudos to them also for having the courage to go into that kind of direction. Yeah, because we've just heard, just to kind of put this a little bit into perspective. Mercedes have, of course, kind of sold smart to Geely, so there's a joint venture going on there. But this is also a sign that the smaller cars are not rated that highly within the company. And then seeing a company such as Genesis to come up with that kind of class is pretty cool. And I think, like I said, I mean, we're fans of Genesis anyway, so we like the stuff that they're doing. But at the same time, you need to have some balls to actually do that, because that's also a risk. I think it would have been easy for them to do another sports car or to do a sedan or an SUV, and I think everybody would have been happy. But this was a surprise, and so that it was just good. I think, I really, really enjoy this. It's still a Genesis. You can still the correlation to the Essentia from last year. I like the direction that they're going. It's modern, it's sporty. It does have a certain kind of it factor to it as well. And you definitely understand where this brand is going to go, because it has this kind of more classic luxury. It's not, as I've mentioned multiple times before, it's not this kind of aggressive factor. This is more about classic but still very beautiful, with some great lines, some really cool shoulders. The rear is a fantastic idea, almost taking the front to the rear and playing around with that a little bit. If you look into the lines, they always, especially on the rear, they make another Genesis logo or this kind of, V-shaped form about it. It's just really, really good fun. And if I think about, having this little car on a track or something like that, this would be so much fun. The proportions look amazing. Obviously, it looks quite flat as well, so you could have really loads of fun. But you could also drive this and find actually a parking spot in a city such as New York, in a city such as LA, and you would be would be fitted well for everything. So I do like that a lot. The only thing that I do have a little bit of a problem with, and obviously it is called mint, so of course the car's colors exterior is green, but I'm not so sure about that, and I'm also not so sure about the interior colors. But that's just my personal kind of feeling, because that kind of light leather that they have in the car might be a bit too old school for me in that regards. But the interior itself, with the parametrics and very simplicity, a front bench pretty much, that's pretty cool. Just not sure about the colors for the interior and the exterior, but that doesn't take away of the actual design of the car.
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It is a bit old school with the interior colorways in particular, but I think they needed to find the link to luxury somehow, because as you mentioned, it's a small car, not typically associated with conventional luxury, and certainly not an American luxury thinking. So,
Sure.
but I think they did a brilliant job, because it's very clean. Again, with the parametric design, as you mentioned, the bench seat is actually quite cool. Because that is traditionally very American as well. But, there's cool elements like the butterfly doors, but proportionally, yeah, I think it works. It's very avant-garde. It's for a city car, which is what this is intended for. It's not a track car, but and my favorite element is just how they chose to treat the IP and again all the controls, in particular like HMI, all centered around the vehicle in these little dials around the steering wheel, rather. And this little screen right there in the middle of the steering wheel with all of the information that you could ever want for your infotainment system and various other bits that are in there. Hyundai is actually, as a group, doing some very interesting things behind the scenes with HMI that we're not entirely are not public, but they're working quite adamantly in terms of creating things that are at once more user friendly, but also very intuitive, but also very much future oriented in terms of keeping within the driving sense of what it is within a vehicle, because obviously designing an HMI for a car is quite different to designing the latest sound system for your living room. So I think they're onto something with the technology, and that's what a lot of buyers are considering. So it's good that they're doing that. So the interior and specifically the whole HMI unit and the steering wheel all around the driver's area is quite appealing to me.
Yeah, and it's simple. I mean, we always talk about simplicity, and I think what Genesis have shown is that there is the complexity actually in the surfaces, and they show open structures. Yeah, so if you look actually behind the steering wheel, there is this little parametric and an open structure, almost as you know it from the Bird's Nest Stadium in Beijing, for example, where everything was turned inside out as well. So they have the complexity in there, but where the simplicity is needed, which is in the controls, which is the clarity of how to use the vehicle, that's where they nail it down. And I think that's a very, very nice balance that they found over there. And from that kind of side, what I do find funny is actually let's call them rear doors. Yeah, so I don't know if this is actually the boot or the trunk, as you say in America, where you then put the stuff in, or if you can actually put your kids in there and stuff like that. That unfortunately would have been great to see actually in or at the show, but it's kind of, I don't know, like Lamborghini doors or butterfly doors, more like Lamborghini doors in the back as well. And that just looks really cool. So there's this one shot from the rear, 3/4 angle, pretty much, I think it is, where you can see those doors open and it looks like the whole thing is flying away. And this is so cool. So there's these little extras as well. And I think what I want to say, because we've seen that in Shanghai a lot of times, what is extremely well made with those kind of with that kind of car in particular is the wheels. Yeah, so the wheels fit absolutely perfect. They're not overdone. They have the simple touch because it's a 5 kind of axis wheel, but they have this little extra in there, which which also is, I think, parametric from what it looks like, but it just fits, and it's not overdone. It's not too much. It just fits the whole picture of the car. And so if you see it, I think, I've shown it to my mom and she's like, oh, that's a pretty car. And she was just like, that's the kind of feeling that you get. And that's what, when I saw it for the first time, I was like, yeah, it is a pretty car, but it has enough depth from the design perspective to be discovered. And it's not over the top, not from the front, not from the rear. It has enough substance to it, but it's not ridiculous. So kudos to them, and let's hope they're gonna blow us away, or they give us a really nice concept again in next year's New York show.
Yeah, the better thing would be if they moved forward with some of these concept cars into production, guys, because we've seen it before, in particular on Infinity, where they've just kept putting out like really successful concepts, things that are absolutely brilliant, and then it just maybe it. And that's the gist of concept cars anyway. It would inform perhaps certain elements of the vehicles that are then on the road, but not in any kind of significant manner, certainly not in what we're seeing from the concept cars that are on show. So little bits, here and there, and that's all well and good. But it would be nicer to see some of these conceptual thoughts make it into a vehicle that can actually get out into the road and drive. So moving,
just
sorry.
to kind of finish that
Yeah.
thought, because you mentioned about the concept cars potentially being put into production. So Manfred Fitzgerald, the man behind Genesis, or the CEO of Genesis, he mentioned that it looks very likely that the Essentia goes into production, but he didn't want to confirm. I think there were a number of outlets that asked him about it, and he was like, yes, we are in good talks about it, but at the same time, nothing is confirmed. So there is still hope for the Essentia to actually go into production. So touch wood that this hopefully goes through.
Yeah, yeah, that would be nice.
Indeed,
Yeah.
indeed.
So, and I'm sure, I'm sure that Manfred and everyone else within the design team in particular is it would love for that to happen.
Yeah.
It's just a question of feasibility and all the rest. So, but nonetheless, very good and interesting things going on outside of New York. So now, moving forward now into more recent developments that we've seen unveiled. The one that was unveiled today is this new McLaren GT. So today being the 15th of May, they've just pulled the wraps off the new McLaren GT, which is basically going to slot into another series. It's not the part of the GT or the Super Series. Sorry, not part of the Super Series. It's a GT car, and what do you make on that?
I'm not so sure. We've seen obviously the first kind of teaser sketch, so that was just like, okay, cool, this could be actually very good. I don't like the pictures. Maybe, and I know I've said this before. Like, what I don't like about McLaren is they have become very aggressive. But also, and this is what I can appreciate about them, is they've become very experimental. They're more like they're always more developed as actual racing cars. Now, this one looks a little bit more like your average city car. Yeah, so this could be like an Aston Martin. This could be more like let's say, a little bit of a more normal Ferrari, put it that way. And I'm not sure if this fits McLaren. I don't know if that fits the brand. In terms of when I look into the car, there's not really much that it's unique or that makes it unique as a McLaren. If you look at it from the side view, there are clear, old DBS, old Vanquish hints to that car, especially in the front. Looks very, very much Aston Martin to me from the last generation, and I just think maybe it was a little bit too rushed. I mean, McLaren said they want to, bring out 20 new cars or something like that in the next 7 years. I don't know. Maybe that is just a little bit too much. So I don't understand. Obviously, they will probably do a convertible version with that at some point as well. But no, not. I would not see, it's not overly beautiful. So I wouldn't buy it for that. For performance, why not buy a 720 or a 650, for example? It's pretty much the same price. So this is about 160,000 pounds, probably about $200,000. So I don't understand. For me personally, yeah, it fits into a new range, but this range is already quite well, placed with other people that just are either more beautiful or are more powerful or more track car like. This is a little bit of a kind of finding something in between, and I think this is a bit of a miss for McLaren.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not overly enthusiastic about this, but perhaps I'm not the person that they're aiming for either. I probably don't fit the demographic of this car, but at the same time, I see what you're saying. It's not entirely what I guess bothers me the most is I find it hard to see any type of consistency within McLaren products, and that is, I guess, what's most troubling for me. But otherwise, as they say, this is a new GT car, so it's not meant to look like anything in the sports or the Super Series. The thing that comes to mind recently is kind of the McLaren Speedtail, and I do see somewhat of a family resemblance there. In my opinion, again, we're just judging here by the pictures, which is very difficult to do, but it's better executed proportionally than the Speedtail was, in my view. And having seen that car in Geneva, I was actually quite surprised because, like you mentioned as well, I don't know what the deal is with McLaren and with their images because, I don't know if it's digital renderings that we're seeing. I don't know if it's actual physical photographs of the physical car, but yeah, I'm not like, I agree with you. The photographs don't do this thing justice. Like when I saw the Speedtail on display on the show stand in person, obviously it communicated something well different than what those early pictures did when we saw it online. So perhaps that's the same with this one. But one thing that I do like is the simplicity within the interior. It's got loads of buttons. This isn't entirely like a digital car by any means. There aren't as many as say in the Panamera, but there's still loads of tactile controls within that. Certainly on the center console and the center stack as well. But they still have this big screen, which is portrait style. It's a GT car. This is a cruiser. But I do like what it is that they've done from an overall simplicity of surfaces and things within the interior, because it's modern, it's very nice, it's very well executed. I'm not sure what it's like from a quality perspective, because again I'm looking at photographs. But the buttons and all of the rest, I mean, piano black is still very much alive and well. But I think if we look at it from like a rear 3/4, you can kind of see, a family resemblance somewhat to the Speedtail, but not to any other products in the lineup. And so that's the one thing.
The only thing that I would say to this is, I think there's two major criticisms for me. I mean, exterior is always one thing. You can like that, you cannot like that. McLaren, get some wheel designers. If you look back into the Speedtail, if we look into the GT now, the wheels are just horrendous. You could do so many cool things with that. They're almost like stock. It's almost like you go into the normal supermarket and you buy a bunch of rims. Sorry, but those are absolutely, like for if I spend $200,000 on a car, I'm expecting cool wheels. And this is just like, oh shit, we need to do some wheels. Let's do something quickly and let's make it as quickly as possible so that we can prototype them and, put them onto the car. Put some more work in there, like the people like that kind of stuff. So that's one point. The other thing for me about, you just mentioned the interior, which is, you mentioned it's simple and everything. There hasn't really been a major revamp of the McLaren interior since they started with the 12C. Yeah. And this is my biggest criticism for McLaren. It's just, you're doing a GT car. So this kind of interior works for a Senna. It works for, a 720S, which are ultra performance cars or high performance cars where you need very, very little middle console. You just need the main facts because you're going usually so fast that you can't just look where you're going. You don't look at the map. You don't look at your radio. You just focus on the track, or you go very, very fast. Now with this, if we're talking about Gran Turismo cars, cruiser cars, this is just not good enough anymore. It's like, oh, we bring something in. We have carryover parts that we can use to kind of make it cheaper to produce. But this is still the kind of car, if you want to attract maybe more women with that, because if you call it a GT, women that maybe drive, a Ferrari or something like that, or maybe they drive an Aston Martin, or like maybe they drive, I don't know, like a BMW or something like that. This doesn't really attract me in that sense. In some parts it looks quite cheap with like, with this kind of click wheel and stuff like that. I think they could do much better, and you can hope that the next generation will come soon, because it is a little bit outdated by now. It might work, yeah. So like it works probably in terms of functionality and everything, but in terms of comparison to other companies nowadays, this is a little bit outdated.
Yeah, I see your point, and I would agree. I still think it's nice. If they could modernize it perhaps a bit, but it's not, it is outdated by, the grand scheme of things, but it's still perfectly functional and well done, I think, for a driver's car. I mean, it's a GT, but it's still a driver's car, right? I mean, no one is going to take like, cross country trips in this. I mean, maybe they will. I don't
Yeah.
know. But no, it's an
Yeah.
interesting take. No, but I do agree with your
Yep.
point on the wheels
Cool.
because everyone knows the wheels, the shoes of the car is what makes and or breaks a design. Ultimately, I think it's such a visual element, such an eye-catching piece that it can change the complete allure of a vehicle when you look at it from a profile, and it can make it more aggressive or less aggressive. And in this case, yeah, they are quite dainty and not particularly fitting for what I believe this model is or is trying to be. So, yeah. All right, good. Well, now moving on
Cool.
to
All
the
right.
next vehicle, and we're working our way up, I think, a little bit here
All right.
because we'll work our way back. So the second to last most recent vehicle is the Citroen 1919 concept, and a car that is I don't even know if it's real. I mean, it could be that these are just renderings that have been shown. I think it's. I think they
No,
have
it's
built
actually
it. I've
real.
seen a
It is
video
actually
where
real.
it does look like people are actually interacting with it, unless their VRAG guys are like crazy good. It does look like they built it. I don't know. They're supposed to show it later on so tomorrow, basically, they're supposed to do a formal unveiling of this car. But I think it's really cool. Obviously, this is Citroen's 100th anniversary, so they saw it fit to come out with a concept that would indicate the future direction of where they're going in terms of what's happening within the industry right now, what the main trends are, what the main talking points are, and they've created something that is really quite very futuristic, of course, but also quite compelling. I mean, I posted a picture of this thing on Instagram, and there was a comment saying, "Would we be giving this thing a second look if it was a student project?" And I think we would, but it's maybe not so much. But at the same time, it's not a student project. This is a major OEM, a French OEM as well, which is known for doing some really quite out there concepts and production cars as well. If we look back in Citroen's history, I think that they've touched on a lot of very trending topics at the moment, right? And the lounge seat in the passenger side, for example, is one such element. The way that you're using this vehicle, the glazed surfacing, the fact that you have this little HMI assistant popping out of the IP. I think all of those things are very relevant to what it is that we're going to see in motor vehicles in the future. Be it autonomous or that's what this car is. Essentially, it's an autonomous vehicle that you can also drive, but it's kind of the antithesis, not the antithesis, a complement, I would say, to that other concept car that we saw in Geneva, which was unveiled, and that was not by Pierre Leclerc. This was done before by Alexandre Malva, and apparently had been kicking around the studio for a number of years, actually, before it was shown. Of course, I'm talking about that little orange thing that the Ami, thank you, the little Ami
The
concept,
Ami.
which is very
The
much
little
a
Ami.
urban vehicle, no questions asked, right? That was a very much an urban vehicle, whereas this is more, not a grand tour because it's a family car. It has 4 seats. It has, the capability of going out of the city as well, given that there are sufficient charge points in 100 years. But it does have a very compelling design, a very compelling aesthetic, and it's interesting in the way that they're using technology as well. And we were talking about
Yeah.
wheels and things. I mean, if you look at this, it's got 30-inch wheels. I think they're like 900 millimeters. The tires are quite narrow, but they're really tall. And the wheel design itself is like really, really cool because it's very much like the Citroen DS with in that steering wheel where it had a fixed hub.
Mm.
This is also a fixed hub wheel on the exterior of the car where everything just kind of goes around this very graphical pattern and the Citroen logo at the center. So one of the highlights, certainly, of the
Yeah.
year so far, I would say, from a concept car perspective, because the Ami kind of kicked it off, and then this brings it a step further into a very futuristic look of what vehicles could potentially look like in 50 years or so, right?
I don't know, mate. Like, for me, look, this is pretty much if you give a student a team of very experienced car designers and just like, look, we do a proper like what full scale um, you know hard model out of this. This is what it would look like. Yeah.
Mm,
For me, the most like the coolest thing is the logo. The
mm,
logo, emphasis this kind of this is what is the tradition for me. This is really about you still know what it is. You see it. It's like, oh, it's a Citroen, but there's something extremely new about this, and this is what I really like. The car itself. I mean, come on, guys. This is really like you go to a show you go to Pforzheim or something like that. You see a bunch of kids who can do that. Obviously, like the details and stuff like that. This is where the time really goes in. If you see this kind of little the strings in the back of the interior, for example, that's really cool. Obviously the color and trim is really, really nice on this one. It makes a lot of sense. The kind of middle console on the rear seat is super nice. The lounge seat, of course, but this is where the professional company comes in. From a conceptual perspective, I would say any high level student would be able to do something similar. Yeah, especially from the exterior perspective. So from the comment that you got on Instagram, I would probably be one of those guys. I would say like, yeah, I would not push for that. And in particular, and this is I think my point, if I compare this to the Ami was 10 times better. The
mm,
Ami had really a purpose. Yeah, the Ami was like, to show you, hey, look, this is what it could go to. The Ami was smart. It was using three doors that all had the same size in different varieties. Even the door hinges were exactly the same, so the doors opened,
mm,
counterwise in that sense. This one is a student project on steroids. Not more,
mm,
not less. It's cool, like we because we always like really cool student projects. Would I say this changes anything about Citroen or something like that? No, I would probably say I'm gonna I've probably forgotten about this in a week's time.
mm.
Whereas with the Ami, I'm sorry, like this is really what stuck to my mind because when we saw it, it was just like, wow, this is really, really cool. This is just a nice little project. Will it have any kind of reference to anything in the future? If I look into it, not really. I hope for the logo because I do really, really enjoy the logo. But the rest, nah, sorry, not my style at all.
Yeah. I mean, again, I do like the exterior. I like how futuristic it is. And this also is referencing this kind of design language that they showed on the ME concept, in particular the front and the rear lamps. I like the protruding wheels from the main kind of volume of the body. I think that's really cool. But again, yeah, you're right. The interior is the highlight for me for sure, just because of the fact of what it is. It's a family car at the end of the day. According to the videos that we've seen, how people interact with it, how they experience the world from within it. And without a doubt, the color and materials, the CMF designers need a big round of applause because what they used in terms of not only colorways, but materials, graphical patterns within the seats and all over the car. The colorways are absolutely fantastic, and really, really super cool. But again, something that you would expect from a French manufacturer like Citroën, because I think they've always pushed the envelope from, in terms of their production cars as well. So this concept, kind of showcasing the future of Citroën's design language, is just bang on, and I really, really like it.
What I do want to say though is I do a little bit have the feeling that the interior was completely done separately from the exterior, because it seems a little bit like the interior concept. So when you look at it on the pictures, and again we haven't seen this car in the flesh, but if you look into the pictures, it gives you this little violet touch, but that comes because of the pattern of the actual material, which is a mix of like a red and a blue. And then you have that, which gives you this kind of violet touch, and the white seats, which is pretty cool. And then you're looking from the outside, and you see everything is black and blue. It's like you could have done that a little bit better. Like it seems to me, that's my personal taste. There was very, very a lot of things that were out of touch a little bit. It's almost like, here interior team plus color and trim do this, exterior team plus color and trim to that, and once we finished it, we put it all together. That's probably, that's just my personal feeling. Some other cars were much, much better with that, and with that kind of, cohesive workaround. But in the end, it's a concept car. We can think whatever we want. This whole thing will never make it to production, thank God. But in the end, if the logo comes through, this whole thing was a success already, because I do really, really like that logo. And if that goes onto an electric car, maybe that is a kind of differentiator for them in the future, that this will be their electric logo. I have no idea, but this would be really, really nice.
I really also like the front seat. I mean, the design of that is pretty cool. I mean, you've got this carbon kind of frame. I don't know what the material is exactly, but the way that the base of that is designed, it's almost like a flower. It's super cool looking. And again, I don't know what comfort levels are like, but, I would imagine that they kind of emphasize that, seeing as that's a Citroën brand value. But that seat in itself is enough to kind of make me want to go and sit and drive that thing around. So, but okay. So moving on now into the latest of the new, or the oldest of the new, which is the VW ID3, which is
yes, the Germans.
Yes,
the Germans.
A very near kind of the closest to production that we're able to see of the newest VW ID. So an all electric car from Volkswagen that they're really pushing into quite quickly now, because of what's happening within the industry. They really need to move into this electric thing sooner rather than later, and for different markets as well. But just getting out of Dieselgate, I mean, there's a variety of different reasons why this needs to happen soon. But obviously the car is a prototype still. It's what they're showing is something that is very. I read an article, so this isn't entirely unique, but you can look this up online. I can't remember where it was written, but anyway, if you look at the ID3 and you look at the Seat Elborn.
Yes, I'm doing that at the moment, actually.
It's the same. They changed the element. It's like the roof line is the same. The A-pillar treatment is the same. Yeah. Even the damn bone line across the body side is the same. It's the same car. They changed certain elements within the front. They changed, a few minor stylistic elements. But, I mean, we talked about this before, in terms of like Volkswagen, and in terms of Volkswagen Group products kind of losing their own individual identity. This is kind of, just case in point right here. This is the right here, perfect example of that. And it's it's a shame that they wouldn't want to differentiate, considering the platform it's based on. I mean, Anyway, your thoughts?
Well, let's say one thing. The Seat actually is quite a nice car. We've seen that in Geneva, and it for a little hatchback, it is actually quite nice. So there's nothing really bad to say. Like it looks very very similar to the Seat. If it would absolutely look horrible, then it's a different story. For me, Volkswagen, of course, this is pretty much the Golf in electric. Yeah, nothing more, nothing less. Even if they might call it differently or whatever you think about it, but it is the Golf just as an electric car. Now I'm excited to see that thing. I think this is there's more kind of the surrounding information that makes this a little bit more interesting. This is supposed to be the first car that's under 30,000 euros as an electric car. That we can find. So it's kind of the Volkswagen, which is like the for everybody, the electric vehicle for everyone. And I'm very excited to see if Volkswagen can actually pull this off in terms of keeping the quality as well. Keeping sure to everything that they can deliver. In terms of a design, we should be honest with ourselves. It is a Volkswagen, and they will not blow us away with any new design innovations or, I don't know, they will not reinvent the wheel. It's Volkswagen. They will stay conservative. We should not really accept or expect crazy things from them. From just the pictures that they've shown, it looks good. Again, please do not do. I hope they're not going to keep those wheels because they are absolutely horrible once again. But it's actually a nice thing, and I have not really a problem with it. For Volkswagen, absolutely fine by me, and it's just going to be interesting to see. If we can, if it's just a color, pretty much what we have at the moment, or if there will be anything different. On under that kind of little wrap around it. But in general, I like it. It's nothing really bad. It gives it makes Volkswagen a bit fresher, but it doesn't really reinvent the wheel. And if that is going to be the Golf 8 or whatever it is that's going to come next, well then that's okay. The only thing that I do worry a little about is the rear, because these lights, they look a little bit like a BMW 1 Series in terms of a style, I have the feeling. So I'm not so sure about those, but let's see. They might be pre-production and they might not be showing the final ones. But that's the only thing that I really have to criticize. Apart from that, solid, but nothing that It's not that kind of car that will come to your mind right away. It's more just like you have it here in Munich all the time. You see a Golf, it's like it's a Golf, but you kind of recognize it, but you don't think about it, and that's going to be exactly the same, right, just as an electric car.
No, I mean, I agree with pretty much everything you said. I don't have anything to add. It's for me a bit lukewarm on the reception. I love the fact that they're doing it. If the interior does look like the Elborn the Elborn, then yes, great. It's not a bad interior. It's not necessarily screaming German, nor is it screaming Spanish. So that's fine. It's not like shaking things up either. But it's a good first step. But I do wish that they'd done something a bit more adventurous, shall we say, in light of the fact that this is an electric platform, and I do know the freedoms that this enables. And so I wish that there was a bit more, perhaps risk taking. But again, it's Volkswagen Group, and they can't step out on that ledge too far. They do want to appeal to the mass market, and this most certainly will.
Yep, indeed. And so it's we've actually had a lot of cars, to be honest. I didn't think it was that many, but
yeah,
talking about them, actually we got up to quite a few. So let's actually sum up a little bit what else happened in the last few weeks, and not really much, only one major announcement, and we can combine that with a little bit of advertising for a future podcast episode as well. So we spoke about Anders Warming a few weeks ago in the podcast, and he is back in the industry. He did start his own design consultancy, And if things go well, and yes, people do throw me under the bus. I am still in touch with Frank Stephenson, and we're still hoping to do that podcast with him. But we will also try to arrange a podcast with Anders, talk a little bit about his new venture, talk a little bit about his experience at BMW and at Borgward. So that should be good fun. Hopefully, we can do that in the next few weeks. And apart from that, I think nothing really else has happened majorly that at least that we are allowed to talk about in public. And that's why, I think, to be honest, we're almost an hour in already. Unless you have any more to say, Eric. The kind of bi-weekly Martin and Eric criticize and like design or car design is pretty much over, isn't it? Like, is there anything that comes to your mind?
No, I mean, the Anders situation is quite interesting. It's the dream of many designers. I had an opportunity to chat with him when I was in Munich last week, and it's every designer dreams of going off on their own, starting their own consultancy. This has been a dream of Anders's for a while, and I wish him the best of luck. And he's not alone in this in this market. He realizes that there's certain challenges that he's going to have to overcome, but at the same time, there's other people that have done it that he's well familiar with. His mentor Chris Bangle is case in point there. He has a very open mind and a very positive outlook. And again, I wish him the very best. And some other things, of course, you and I know best. We work in a very secretive and very sensitive environment. The car design industry is, there are things that unfortunately, we become aware of and we cannot discuss. And sooner, hopefully sooner rather than later, we will be able to discuss some of the other developments. But again, nothing now that I can mention. So moving on. What are your next thoughts?
We can talk about something for a few more minutes. We still have some left, don't we? We can annoy
Okay, fine.
a few minutes. Okay,
a few minutes.
So we had this idea.
Right.
And we want to implement kind of the listeners a little bit to that as well. So
I would love feedback on this.
Yes, because we might actually bring this up for a much bigger feature. But this is something that we absolutely love, because we asked us the questions like, where is the inspiration for a lot of car designers coming from? So, we were thinking about culture. So you were thinking about, could be books, could be movies, could be video games, could be, I don't know, even music and stuff like that. So, we wanted to talk about a little bit about the idea of the importance of car design to films in particular, both ways. Yeah. So films implementing car design, like, cars that were specifically made for movies, but also where car design or vehicle design fundamentally changed certain movies in that sense. And so where we're interested is obviously to find out a little bit from you. What do you think about those things? What did inspire you from a film perspective? Because we came up with things, and Eric, the first thing you mentioned pretty much right away was Sid Mead. With Blade Runner and his sketches. There was an exhibition I think recently that Fabio Filippini posted about on Facebook about Sid Mead in Tokyo. So he's this kind of cultural phenomenon. So how do you see Sid Mead? Do you see him as like this concept artist that has brought the vehicle design into movies, or do you see him as a vehicle designer that understood that he has to change something for movies? Or how do you see him as an inspiration in both directions?
Well, basically, I mean, Sid Mead's been an inspiration for everybody, I think, within the design community, certainly. Even from his career going back as far as when he was an actual designer before he crossed over into entertainment design. And I think there is that crossover. Obviously, he's certainly influenced people like Daniel Simon, which we'll get into later on in this dialogue. But I think looking at cars, Sid Mead's vehicles, I mean, this was a flight of fancy, right? This was a guy with an incredible amount of creativity coming up with some really future looking concept. Obviously, he calls himself a futurist. That's what he is. But then, he caught the eye of certain directors that were like, hey, let's do something over here because you can create things. So Blade Runner, of course, Tron, all of these vehicles, all of these films rather that he created video or concept vehicles for that were, really out there. It was just really an amazing feat, like as a kid looking at that and being like, and the thing is, I want to say something over here because I think that I stand alone in that I work in the automotive design industry, in the car design industry, and I'm passionate about automotive design, car design. But I don't give a toss about science fiction films. I really don't like sci-fi. I like things that are real. So Star Wars, Star Trek, sorry, sue me. I hate that. I don't watch that. Like I don't. But the only reason that I did go and see things like Blade Runner, things like Tron, is because of the cars and because of the vehicles and because it was such an unbelievable futuristic gaze into, what the future could potentially hold. And it was like, in the level of work as well within that, it must be said, even when you look at like old films, where there was nowhere near the level of technology capable of, creating what it was that he'd formulated in his head and put down on paper. That was like just incredible to see. And Sid Mead, obviously a huge influence in, for designers, in my opinion, people that I've spoken with anyway, certainly I think hold him in a very high esteem. Art Center grad, the guy went down the car design road, much like Daniel Simon, and then realized that they were better suited for entertainment design or perhaps just enjoyed it more, like Daniel Simon. When he went out and he did his started off his career working with VW, like he was in Santa Monica. He was working in Sitges, I think. And he was like, I really don't, like the fact that, the what is traditional in this business. Obviously, some guys, they'll work on a production or a concept car, rather, maybe a production car even. And, 1 year into a boatload of work that they poured their heart and soul into, it gets canceled, right? So it's like 1 year's worth of work, just flushing it down the toilet. And I think that can get frustrating for designers after a certain amount of time, which is one reason why Daniel Simon decided to jump. And, and so he's, I had a great interview with him many years ago now. I met him out on a beach in Venice, and it was awesome. And he was very much living the California life, because at that point, he'd done his kind of, recused himself from the car design, went and just kind of set up on a beach in Brazil and started sketching, at which point Scott Robertson caught wind of what he was doing and said, hey, let's do a book. And that was really what capitulated, what moved his career into stardom, essentially. Afterwards, he started creating books like Cosmic Motors and et cetera, et cetera. The guy's story is phenomenal. You can read it in many different places. You can even watch a video that I have on my YouTube channel where I did a 2-part interview with him after the article that I wrote. But it's like, I think movies in general, when you look at the vehicles that are positioned within movies, it's as much product placement as anything, but it can definitely inspire. And designers, I think, like anyone, musicians, get inspired from any artist gets inspired by various different occurrences within their lives, what they see, what they experience, all sorts of social parameters that are, they feed off of, right? And that is really just truly incredible, and really the creative space in which we're in. So, but if you look at, say, I don't know, cars like the DeLorean, for example, that like was a completely like very futuristic thing that really did loads for the company. Unfortunately, it was too far gone at that point. But when you look at certain things like, the James Bond films, all of these vehicles, perhaps at one point it was just, pure product placement. Like in the beginning, for example, can we get an Aston Martin? And I'm sure it was quite difficult to get Aston to say, yeah, let's do this. And then in the end, how many Bond films have they now appeared in, right? It's the iconic Bond car. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how that effectively has influenced people's decisions to want to get into design, unless you take, for example, the
Mm,
most recent one, which you mentioned in our earlier conversation, which was the DB10, which was specifically designed to be a Bond car from the outset. Um, so yeah, it's an interesting topic. I mean, I really want to see and hear from our viewers, our listeners, and gauge, what was kind of the tipping point, because every single one of us, for the most part, has always been passionate about cars before we could even probably walk, or barely walk, and we were playing with Matchbox cars or something, right? There was always that car bug.
yeah, exactly. And also like finding out a little bit about what kind of generation did you grow up with. I mean, you have Sid Mead, and Sid Mead obviously rose to a lot of fame when it comes to Blade Runner, which was in the 80s. Then you had like a DB5 of a James Bond movie, which was in the 60s. We're talking about a Tron, or like we're talking about a generation of the
Mm,
2000s, which was definitely Fast and Furious driven, with these tuning cars. We're talking about the 2010s, which restarted and
that's right.
reignited Tron, which was a Daniel Simon project, of course, with the bicycle and everything. And it depending on what kind of time you grew up, there is something iconic. And maybe in 15 years time or something like that, we have kids that will tell us, or people that will tell us that they were first uh, you
Right.
know inspired by Cars, the movie, the Disney movie. We just don't know, and this is something that what we found so interesting, because it's not just about the general kind of the general direction that everything goes to, like what car design is or where the inspiration comes from, but also what kind of heritage this has, and what kind of maybe complication it brings in the future. I mean, look into Aston Martin. I mean, obviously, Eric, you know this. I have a 2005 Vantage. I'm a massive James Bond fan. I love the old DB5. I love the DB10. Just saw it again this weekend. And for me, it's like, it's also a problem of the heritage. Like, if you think it's always the James Bond car, how far can you take it from that side? It's the same with the DeLorean. The DeLorean will always be in your mind when it comes to Back to the Future. And if you want to do a new DeLorean car, then what are you going to do? I mean, is it going to be connected to that old iconic Back in the Future car, or is it going to be something completely different, and you don't even want to have that kind of connection? So the heritage obviously is very much predestined if a car in a movie, and specifically designed for a movie, has something to say for a brand. And this is where the product placement, of course, becomes in a little bit on the tricky side, from my personal perspective. But it's the same with the Supra. I mean, in my generation, I just turned 30 last year. When I think about the Supra, I'm thinking about this orange Supra that was in the Fast and the Furious. I remember you told me once you think that thing is absolutely hideous in terms of the graphics and everything. But for me, it's just like, this is the Supra that I think of. It's the same for the Skyline that was in Fast and the Furious, because that was the time when I grew up. So when I think about a GTR, then I'm thinking about that Skyline in particular. So it's always the kind of question that comes in: what do you think of the inspiration in that? And is this something that you want to keep on going, or do you think we can leave that behind and just do something differently? And this is where I certainly believe it's so interesting to hear from the listeners a little bit, and just like, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about the inspiration, and where do you draw the line between a Sid Mead and a Daniel Simon kind of guys, super conceptual, and then the Aston guys that do a car which is pretty much a Vantage but just looking nicer for a James Bond movie? I mean, there's so much in the middle, but this is the two extremes that we have: ultra conceptual, or then actually doing a production car for a movie. So let us know what you think about this, and we would be really, really interested to hear where your inspiration's coming from, and maybe even what movie. Might be Magnum as well, Magnum PI with the Ferrari or something like that. I have no idea. Whatever you like.
I think what's also interesting is, to see the trajectory of some designers where they've actually contributed to movie cars as well. So it's not just, you know, what kind of cars in movies inspired you, but also, in the flip side, it's like a lot of these guys that are designers working in studios, they have these crazy visions of creating something that they could never do within the automaker that they're working for. One like comes to mind is the late Chris Fenson, who was responsible for the Ford GT. He worked
Mm-hmm.
on the Pink Panther car. I mean, this is like, he worked on some crazy stuff for movies. Like he did some movie vehicles himself. And this was like really like quite cool things, where it's that creative outlet that you can never kind of have within an automaker like Ford, for example. So
Mm-hmm.
he did some really cool stuff, and other designers as well have contributed to that. Have been a part of it. Um, if we look at some other designers like, and I'm blanking on the guys' names, but like Mad Max and things like that. I mean, all of these
Yeah.
like, guys that were in the industry, in the auto industry, went and contributed to these types of products,
Yeah.
and in movie cars rather. So it was like,
Yeah.
it was really cool. So yeah, I mean, an interesting topic, and certainly very. I'm certainly very interested in finding out what inspired certain people from a movie space.
Yeah, exactly. So let us know about this because we are very interested. We might actually go into a bit more detail in a future episode. But in the meantime, to wrap things up, please do us a favor. If you listen to us on iTunes, on Spotify, or whatever, do give us a good rating. A 5-star rating would be preferred because then we're going up the ranks and more people can listen to us. That would be fantastic. Also, if you haven't done that yet, listen to our review of the Shanghai show because that was actually good fun. The video version will be online very soon as well on YouTube. And last but not least, we have released a new special episode, which is with Takumi Yamamoto, who some of you might know from the Citroen GT concept that was actually featured in Gran Turismo, I think it was 6 when that first came out. And we had a lovely conversation with him because he did the David Bowie tribute car and had a really really nice chat with him. He gave us a lot of insights on what went through his mind and how long this car was actually in the making. And apart from that, Eric, anything you would like to say before we head out?
Yeah, yeah. I just had a brain fart there, and I apologize because I remember the car was pink, but it wasn't for the Pink Panther. It was actually Fab One. It was for the Thunderbirds film. So I wanted to correct myself on there before I sound like a complete idiot. But
You just sound
yeah,
old, man. You just sound old. Our young listeners were just like, "What is that? What are
well,
you talking about?"
look it up, and check it out. But yeah, no. So as far as everything else goes, no, I do not have anything to add. But I do want to thank everyone that has and continues to listen to us, go on about certain things, and share our opinions and our insights. And hopefully, you will find this valuable and others that we've done. And yeah, look forward to getting on the next one and hearing your feedback on this one and some of the other podcasts that we've done before as well. And yeah, until then, hope you guys keep well, stay creative, and yeah.
Hear you soon. Speak
All
to you
right, take care,
soon.
guys.
Take
Bye
take care,
bye.
guys. Bye.